Okay, so we're just going to pick up where we left off in the previous lesson. So I'll just hop straight into Cinema and we'll keep going. So naturally we have the next pose being the one where she has the sword completely lifted up in her super proud pose. So I kind of want to communicate how light she thinks this really big sword is. But I still kind of feel that it's important for us to show that she is like shifting her weight to lift the sword up. So we'll hop to the next frame that we're going to keyframe, and I'm kind of seeing this lift off thing happening at frame 25. Now, if you, for example, go ahead and move your left arm up right now, you'll see that our sword isn't following our arm. So we'll need to solve that somehow. And when it comes to parenting objects and keyframing them, I feel like that's a bit of a risky business usually, because if you keyframe an object being parented, it will get some local coordinates, and then once you keyframe it not being parented anymore, it's going to inherit some other coordinates, and that might mess up things when you go back and forth between your animation and your parenting. So I usually just like to make a duplicate of my object so I can switch between the static one and the parented one. So I'll basically make a duplicate of our sword being stuck here in the ground and parent it at this frame. So the parented one will kind of follow her arm swinging up. And that's the frame where we will turn on the visibility for that sword. So before we go ahead and swing her arm up, we'll want to make this change. So I'll want to come into my layers here and display all of our objects while we're doing this. So I'll just unhide everything and unlock it. I'll also just fold it down so we don't have all of this clutter. And I'll come to my sword here. And I'll also just make sure that I turn off auto keying right now, because we don't want to key anything that we change. So let's come back to my attributes, and we'll make this sword into an instance instead of just making a duplicate of it. In case we want to change, the shape of something, we want the changes to be applied to the duplicate as well. So we will have the sword selected. I will come here and I will release on instance, which makes a duplicate of our sword, placed in the exact same position, which is what we want. Now, when she lifts up the sword, I want to hide the original one. The only problem is, if I go ahead and hide the original sword, you'll see that the instance also gets hidden. And that is because it is inheriting the visibility attributes of the original one. Now, it's super simple for us to solve this little issue. And the way we're going to do that is just create another group on top of our original sword. So I'll just hit Alt-G like that. And we'll call our new null sword and the old one sword model like that. And now we'll just hop into our instance and make sure that the reference object is the sword model null. And now if we go ahead and turn off our original sword, the instance is still visible. So we'll move on. I'll go ahead and unhide my original sword. And just for reminders, I'm holding Alt as I click these. That will turn them on and off at the same time, so I don't have to go through and do this manually. So at frame 25, that's the frame that I want to basically switch from the original sword to the instance sword. So I'll go ahead and head into basics here. I'll go to frame 0 because we need to store the visibility here. So I just keyframe the viewport and the render visibility. I'll hop to frame 25 and then I'll turn it off like that. And I will do the opposite for our sword instance. So I will hop to frame 0. I will turn it off. I will keyframe both render and viewport visibility, hop to frame 25, and then turn it on like that. So if we hop between frame 24 and 25, you can see that we switch between these. Now, if we go ahead and move our left arm, you can still see that we haven't parented it yet, so it won't follow along. And instead of just like taking our sword instance and like dragging it into our character null system here, we can just parent the sword using a little clever tag called the constraint tag. So we're going to create a constraint between our hand and our sword. So I'll just right click on our sword instance. We'll come up to rigging tags and find the constraint tag like that. And we will turn on the parent constraint, head into that tab, and we want to make sure that position and rotation is checked on. We will open up our left arm here and find our left hand and just pull that into the target, just like that. Perfect. Now when I rotate my arm, this sword will follow, just like we wanted. Great. So now with all that done, we can finally go ahead and place our pose in. So I want to lift her arm up really, really high. So naturally, I'll just go ahead and rotate our arm up. And before we do that, we need to make sure that we have auto keying switched on. Good thing I remember that. Great, and now we can go ahead and rotate the arm up. Do it really high, something like this. And it looks very, very awkward in this position, but we'll do those fixes later, like that. Great. And with that, we can also go ahead and do the same for our upper body. So we want our upper body to rotate a bit in this direction. So quite a lot, way more than before. So something like that. And I'll also just go ahead and store these values for the H and the P rotation as well. Just like that. Dook. Nice. Now for her to stand like this holding the sword, she'll obviously need to twist her arm. And that might turn into a pretty awkward, like rotational movement if she just like do this and then flips the sword up. It won't really look that good in our camera angle. And this kind of comes back to one of the animation principles, which is the arcs one. So naturally, if I just take my doodle tool here, we want the sword to go from, this position and then follow this lovely, circular arc motion until it reaches this position. So for us to do this, we need to do some like visual sleight of hands between our poses here. So I will basically be rotating her left forearm like we did when we twisted her hand in these poses. So I will twist her forearm to somewhere around 95 degrees, I'd say, something like this. And I'll go ahead and store the rotation P and B here as well. So when we are then doing in-betweens and smoothing and stuff, we'll probably just have her arm twist between one frame and another, and then we'll just kind of create that overall arcing motion. And you might think, isn't that going to look a bit weird with her hand like snapping back immediately like that? But since you have this lovely other motion going on with her sword following this arc, you won't really be able to tell. And you kind of see that once we get into that. And I think it's going to look good because we're not going to be able to focus on her hand facing backwards or forward. Like we're going to focus on this massive movement that she's doing with the sword and the hand. So with that said, we'll keep on positioning our arms and hands. So naturally, we kind of want her arm to not be just like this, but more like angled in a way so that her sword kind of follows the angle of her arm that she's holding out like this. So we'll come down to the left hand controller and we'll just kind of put this in a really strange position like this. But our arms can basically do this. So it's not that strange for her to do this, but it might feel awkward when you're twisting her hand the way we are currently. And we'll just kind of rotate this around until we find a nice pose. I kind of want it to feel, pretty graphic and illustrative. So I want some nice poses when we do this. And we're kind of getting a lot of intersection when it comes to the bottom of the sword here. So we'll try and solve that. I'll just store our rotation H here. Just flip back and forth like this. Kind of want the sword to follow it a bit more. Like currently it's just doing this, and we kind of want it to. It won't be possible to make it completely follow, but just a bit more I feel like we can do. So I'll go ahead and select our left hand, and I'll just go ahead and try and rotate it around a bit to see if we can get some bit better result here. Something like that, maybe. I also feel like the sword is a bit too deep within her hand. I kind of want the handle to be a bit more protruding from her palm. So since this sword is just parented, we can just go ahead and just move it wherever in this pose where we feel like it fits best. So I'll just go ahead and like tweak these parameters until I find something that feels better. Nice. And that also kind of make the bottom of the sword not intersect so much with her glove. I'll keep tweaking her hand position just a bit. Yeah, we're getting there. I kind of feel like her thumb should be more placed above the handle here. So I'll just go ahead and select her thumb controller. Oh, right. Yeah, we actually haven't locked away our scene. So we'll go ahead and just do that. Right click, unfold all, like that. And now we're ready to go. So I'll just select our left thumb. I'll just kind of play around with this until it feels a bit better. Hands are always the hardest, as I said, exactly when drawing. We're so used to seeing them, so it's hard to trick our eyes. I feel like that's a pretty decent pose though. Might want to rotate the sword just a bit, so it's not as this much of an angle, something like that. Maybe even want to move it down a bit in her hand, something like that. Okay, yeah, I'm feeling pretty happy with this. These are the steps of the animation process that we should spend our time on. We should really try and focus on the poses that we're placing in the beginning, because that will kind of dictate the entire process when we are animating later. Obviously, you can change poses and stuff later on when you are smoothing, but spending time here and focusing on the poses definitely helps us later down the line. So yeah, I feel like we can move on from this though. I'm happy with the current stance that she has, so we can just kind of play through the sequence and see how this feels before we fully move on. Nice. Perfect. Okay, so the next movement that we'll do is basically after she swung the sword. So she'll basically have gone from this to like, that will be the next block pose that we're doing. So we'll try and figure out what the most natural stance for her would be. So the first thing that I'll do is just kind of rotate her upper body back, because she won't be having like this much of a rotated torso. Like it would sort of angle itself out once she like shifts the weight of the sword, so her body kind of like counter moves that a bit. And I think we can do that at maybe like frame 35. So I'll just set this to 0, and then I'll store these two. I'll probably want to shift her like upper body a bit towards the direction that she's swinging, but I'll focus on the arm before we get into that. All right, so let's go ahead and focus on our left arm. So I'll just kind of tinker with the axes here just to see what they do. All right, so we'll want to have her arm shifted way down like that and then twisted in this direction. Something like this. Not as far maybe, so something like that. Might have to readjust the positions of her laces here, but as I said, we'll focus on the poses before we get into that kind of stuff. And we are having some weird results here with the shoulder poking out. Her arm is intersecting a whole lot with her body, and that is of course due to, you know, the simplicity of our rig and like the stylized design that we're using. And instead of trying just to solve this technically, I just like to keyframe things so, you know, the poses will line up. And I think we actually can partly rotate the upper body, because that will naturally hide some of our flaws here. But I also think that we can keyframe the position values of our left arm. And I mean, it kind of makes sense that her, like, if you do swing from this kind of position to like in front of yourself, your whole shoulder would kind of follow with that. So it kind of makes sense, like from a purely physical standpoint, and it kind of helps us solve this flaw of her arm kind of intersecting with her entire body. So I'll just go ahead and make sure that I store all of my rotation values here. We'll go ahead and hop into our upper body, and I'll just kind of twist it something like this, maybe around 9 degrees. Let's do that. Just feel how that feels. Maybe even more. Bam. And it's kind of odd that her head follows the upper body as much as it does, because if you would swing like this, you would naturally be looking at where you're swinging like the entire time. So even if your body moves, your head will kind of, you know, counter rotate that. So that's what we're going to do for her head as well. So I'll just hop to my head null here. I'll check, that's the axis. We'll just keyframe that. And we'll also make sure that we keyframe the previous value, which would be at frame 25. Just come down to my head, keyframe them all, and then go to the next pose, which is at frame 35. And we'll just kind of counter rotate that and skip back and forth just to kind of see. Yeah. Maybe not perfectly counter rotate it, because then it might look a bit odd. It might look a bit robotic. But maybe something like -10, -12. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I feel like that's hitting the spot. So next thing, we can just go ahead and shift our left arm in this direction, just so we kind of eliminate this weird shoulder poking out from her poncho. So we'll come up to the left arm null. I'll make sure that we store our position value at the previous pose, like that. And then we'll go ahead and move this forward. I'll just drag it in along the local y-axis. So I'm shifting from the world coordinate system to the object coordinate system, and I'll just kind of shift this forward just a bit. I don't want her shoulder to move down so much from the string that we have, so I'll just kind of move it up a bit as I do that. We'll just view this, and I'll go ahead and hop out to our perspective view just to see how this is looking. Yeah, all right. So I think we can feel pretty happy with how our left arm is behaving currently. So as for the forearm, we won't really be doing anything in this pose here. But I do know that once we add our in-betweens, like with, for example, like a baseball or throwing a ball, you wouldn't just like push it forward. Like you would have this sling effect where the elbow and the like shoulder moves forward and the kind of hand comes along and then swings forward. So we kind of want to do the same sort of motion as she swings the sword. But in this pose, naturally, it would be fully extended, so it would be straight. But since I do know that we're going to add those in-betweens, I'll just make sure that I store my rotation values for this pose, for our forearm. And then we'll move ahead with the hand. And there's nothing wrong with the hand currently, but I do want to have a bit more of an interesting view of the blade. Even though like she is pointing it forward like she probably would do in this angle, we want the sword to look good in the actual angle that we're going to render it from. So I'll just kind of try and shift it around here a bit so we see a bit more of the blade, because that's going to look really nice in our render. And since I don't have her swinging, like this, so her blade wouldn't be like fully straight on like this. I am having her swing from, the side coming down. So then the blade should kind of follow the angle of her swing. So I'll just kind of shift the sword around something like this. So we end up on a placement that feels natural, something like that. And we can go ahead and just scrub through, see how this feels. You can kind of imagine the in-betweens here, just to kind of visualize how this swinging will feel. I reckon it's feeling pretty good. We are going to tweak this quite a lot once we do get into in-betweens and smoothing, but this is still an important step, just to kind of make ourselves comfortable with the motion that's going on here. I feel like that's feeling pretty good. And we can go ahead and play this from the beginning. I might have messed up her hand a bit now that I was tweaking, so I'm just gonna see if I can just undo some of those weird tweaks that I did. It was pretty good before, once I started putting my hand all over it. Okay, something like that. Choop. Okay, great. We'll move on. So the next pose that we're going to do is basically her full swing being finished at her left side. So she's fully swinged her sword out, super majestic, like confident pose. Like the sword is like dead straight. She knows exactly what she's doing when she's swinging the sword. So I kind of want to leverage some form of like very, geometrical, lovely silhouette where, we have her poncho flying in the wind and she just has her arm like completely level straight like that. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And I think at frame 41 is a good spot to do that. And for this pose, it kind of makes sense to shift her position values back to where they are roughly around here, since we are going to have her shoulder being back in that position. So I'll just kind of go through and copy these things to frame 41. Like this. Nice. Looks odd. So her shoulder snapping. All right, and now we'll rotate her arm out like that. I'll just maybe zero this value out, and we'll just bring it to a lovely minus 90 degrees. And now we have this like super straight, lovely line here. And naturally, if she swings that way, her upper body will probably go with. So I'll just go ahead and do that as well. So I'll maybe shift it. I mean, her entire body will probably like come with that big movement. So I'll maybe want it to end up on like minus 9 degrees, something like that. And we can just feel this out a bit. Slaps her sword back. And we'll also just go ahead and counter rotate her head. So maybe like plus 7 or 8 degrees. I'll store these. Maybe even 8. Oof. Let's do 9. And like before, we'll twist her elbow. So we'll come up to the left forearm. We will go ahead and twist this to, let's see how it looks like at 0. All right. I think we can do the rest with her hand. I'll actually just zero these out just to see what that looks like. And even though all of our like hand, forearm, and left arm are on like even degrees currently, they are at 0, 0, 90. The sword should be straight here, right? And I think that's due to the fact that our sword instance is at a uneven number. So we shouldn't be afraid of keyframing the actual sword instance, because that's part of our animation. So we can just keyframe the rotation that's happening here. We don't need to keyframe anything else. So I'll just make sure that we store the sword rotation where we have it here. So I'll just keyframe that. We'll hop to frame 41 and I'll just zero it out like that. And now we can kind of come over to the left hand here and swing that out. Just kind of try and angle it at the most visually pleasing angle here. So something like that. We'll just go ahead and scrub this back and forth just to kind of feel the motion. That's feeling really nice, I think. You're getting like proper like anime vibes from this pose. I feel like I think that's why I'm so fond of it. Might not want her arm to swing out so much. I'll just kind of reposition it, something like this, just to kind of feel this. But I think it was pretty good before. I think we might even want to rotate it even more. So maybe like at minus 45 degrees. I'll just hop out to our perspective view just so this isn't crazy, but I don't think it is. It's looking, I mean, it is an extreme pose, but we want things to be exaggerated, I think. So let's just play this one more time. And I'll just deselect everything. Yeah, I like that. All right, we should call ourselves happy with that, I think. So we'll move on to the next pose. And the next one will basically be the moment right before she puts the sword down back into the ground. So it will basically be at like the peak height where she has the sword just before she like slams it down into the ground again. So instead of creating a completely new pose, since we know that we're going to go from this pose to the one where she has the sword gripped and pushed into the ground, which will basically be an identical pose to this one. Just the difference is that the motion will be reversed. We can actually go ahead and copy the values that we have from this one and then just angle her body upwards and lift her arm upwards. So instead of creating a completely new pose. So we'll go ahead and do that. So I know that our upper body and our head will be at 0 here. So I'll just select them both, hit 0 for the rotation age, and I'll just store our rotation values here. Oh, also, we are going to do this at frame 49 and not 51. And as I mentioned before, if you want to shift the timing of certain poses, make sure that you select all of your elements in your object panel, hitting Control or Command A, and then we can go ahead and just drag it over here like that. So, boop. Great. All right, so we'll go ahead and copy the left arm values that we have at this pose. So that's basically just going to be these rotation values. So I'll just go ahead and Control C, Control V, frame 16 to frame 49. Control V. Just like that. Look. Great. And I think the forearm is doing some stuff here as well. -85 there. And we'll also keyframe those. Great. Doop. And lastly, the hand, which is at 4.685 and then 5 there. So I'll just 0 that, and then 5. All right, perfect. So a clever thing that we can do here is actually, we know that this pose will be the pose after the one where she shoves it down. So naturally, we can just hop a few frames forward and store this so we don't have to like reposition anything. So we just go ahead and store our left hand, left forearm, left arm, and same with the upper body, because I do know that we're going to rotate that up a bit. So we won't notice any differences right now. But if I do go ahead and just pose our lift up pose here, so if I just rotate her upper body out like that, we'll probably want to have her left arm rotated up. You can see now that we kind of have this motion already posed out for us. So now we'll just kind of want this motion to make sense. And we don't want her blade to go from here and then snap to here. We naturally want this motion to be just, her shoving it down like straight down instead of just like angling it and like sliding it into the ground. So that naturally means that we need to kind of counter rotate our hand so the sword blade points down towards the place where we know that it's going to stick. So I can actually just come to the frame where we know that it's going to stick down, and I'll just take my doodle tool and just kind of draw. This is the middle point of where it's going to stick down. Then if I hop to this frame, I can just angle it slightly above there. So now that we have this little mark here, we can just go ahead and angle our hand so it kind of fits in that spot. So something like this. Great. And if you just hop between frame 16 and 55 right now, you can see that since we have rotated our sword while we animated the parental sword, we'll want to make sure that this pose at frame 49 kind of lines up with that rotation. So we'll just need to rotate our sword just a bit, so something like that. And as you can tell, we are getting a lot of intersections and stuff here, but I think we can make this pose a bit better. And if you were to like shove something down, you probably wouldn't have your arm like fully straight out. You'd probably help your elbow and to gain the power to push it down. So I think we can do that here. So we can actually come into our left forearm. I'll just kind of do some rotation stuff here, and we'll kind of sort this out in a bit. That means that we kind of can rotate this one up a bit, and then we can rotate back our hand a bit because it was feeling a bit too angled. So maybe something like that. We'll scrub through. Might want to rotate the forearm out a bit. And then also just reposition the hand a bit. Just try that. That feels pretty good, actually. Oof. Great. Yeah, I like that. So I kind of angle her sword out a bit. So instead of it being like fully flat here, we're kind of angling it out. And that just feels, I think it feels a bit more natural. And then we still have some way to travel down here, so we don't have the sword rotated in here, because that would feel a bit odd with her sword kind of snapping down on the left side instead of the right. So I kind of have it so the trajectory kind of goes slightly right and then down like that. So let's just play this through and see how it feels. Oof. And you might be thinking, shouldn't we snap back to the static sword now since we have it placed in the ground? And you are right, we should do that. So at this pose, which is at frame 55, we'll go ahead and turn our instance object off. So we'll just hit off here, turn off the visibilities, and then we'll turn the visibility on for the static sword, just like that. Boom. Perfect. Let's fill this out. Bam, bam. Might want her hand to be a bit further down on the handle. So I'll just rotate it down just a bit like that. So it's at the middle. Boom. Lovely. All right, so we'll move on. So naturally, this next post would kind of be the exact same thing as we have going on here. So we can copy some of the values like the left arm, for example, but we'll kind of want to manually tweak the hand and the fingers because those might actually be a bit differently placed if we have her hand traveling backwards rather than forwards in front of the handle. So we just want to do some tweaks there. But we can go ahead and copy the upper body and the left arm values from frame 11, I think it is. Yeah, to the next one. So yeah, this is just 0, 0, 1. And I think the next frame that we can place this at is frame 63. So I'll just copy all of these and then just change this to 1. Perfect. Then we'll select the left arm and I'll just keyframe all of these just to make sure that we have this stored so we know which frame to come back to. And we'll go to frame 11. Just copy these, paste them in. So I copied and pasted all of the values from frame 11 to 63. So now we have something looking something like this. So we have this kind of movement. And then we can go ahead and twist the forearm because we kind of want to angle her hand, something like this. And I'll go ahead and store these two. So we have doop, doop, like that. And we'll go ahead and open up her hands and fingers. But before we do edit any of these, let's just make sure that we store this from the previous post. So that is frame 55. So just go through here. Just make sure that we have those stored. And the same for the left thumb. All right, so with that, we can go ahead and start moving things around. I'll just open up the thumb bend here. Something like this. We'll rotate it out like that. Just kind of bend it. And we'll just go ahead and tweak these around. And let's just angle the hand in a way that we can actually see what we're doing. And while we're posing, just feel free to just scrub back and forth just to see what we are actually doing. As I said, this is the same as the traditional animators flipping the pages back and forth. So we naturally want to compare the movements just to kind of see how things might act. So might want to just reconfigure her hand, something like this. Kind of twist it a bit like that. Yeah, I think we have something there. Boop. Just make sure that we're not intersecting this too much. No, it's looking good. All right. Yeah, I think we can be happy with this. I think we're gonna tweak this a bit once we do the splining, but for now, I think this is looking really nice. So the next pose that we'll place will be at frame 67, and this needs to be the exact same pose as we have at frame 0, otherwise our sequence won't loop. So here it's important that we make sure that we copy and paste all of the attributes that we have at frame 0. So we'll just go through each body part and just make sure that we paste the same values that we have here at frame 67. So that will be 0, 0, 0, like that. For the left arm, we'll just hop to frame 67, just paste all of these in. Like that. Great. And if you want to compare the frame that will be your last before the looping point, you can just, hop back and forth like this and see what needs to be done. So we see that the upper body is looking perfect, left arm as well, mostly just the hand and fingers and the forearm that needs to be fixed. So we'll just take a look here. 95 and 0 in the other, and we'll just make sure that we do this on frame 67 and not this one. 95, 0, 0. And we'll take a look at the hand. So 0, -8, and 0. 0, -8, 0, like that. And I believe we just have the fingers to fix now. So we'll take a look at the thumb. Great, and then we'll do the bend. Hop back and forth just to see. So now it's just the fingers. So we'll take a look at what the fingers values are. So it's -114, hop to frame 67, lip, -140, pinky. I'm moving a bit quicker now since I'm just repeating the same step over and over again. Hope you can keep up, but yeah, as I said, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, so it shouldn't be an issue. And I still have my doodle object here, so I'll just go ahead and delete that since I drew a bit in the scene. And yeah, I think we can maybe go ahead and look at the sequence now. So I'll just go ahead and play this through. Nice. This is looking really, really good, I think. This is going to be a super nice animation. Boop. And it's looping, which is perfect. Yeah, I'm feeling super pleased with this. Hopefully you are as well. In the next lesson, we're finally going to get into the in-betweens, which will basically be roughly around the same kind of process as we are doing right now. We're just placing out stepped keyframes, but we are adding a few more poses here and there, and it's going to do a lot to the perception of our animation, I think. So yeah, I can't wait to show you that. So I'll see you over there.